People often wonder why empaths leave without warning, why they can be so gentle, so giving, and then suddenly, gone, no fight, no grand announcement, just silence. The truth is, empaths don't leave the first time they're hurt. They don't leave at the first sign of disrespect. They don't even leave when they're exhausted and drained. They leave when something inside finally breaks, when carrying the weight becomes heavier than their own soul can hold. See, empaths are masters at absorbing what others pour out. The anger, the disappointment, the neglect, the constant taking. They absorb it quietly, convincing themselves they can handle it, convincing themselves that love means enduring. But here's what no one notices: every unkind word is stored. Every ignored need is remembered. Every silent tear builds into a storm no one sees coming. And one day, without warning, they decide it's enough. And when that day comes, it's not a choice of anger, it's a choice of survival. That's why they don't explain, because explaining feels pointless. They've explained 1,000 times already in small, quiet ways. In the way they pulled back when their energy was drained. In the way they hinted at their pain, hoping someone would notice. In the way they smiled when they were breaking inside. The truth is, empaths give warnings all the time. But those warnings are soft, and most people never hear them. So when they finally leave, it looks sudden. It feels like betrayal. It feels like abandonment. But in their heart, it was years in the making. It was the last thread snapping after holding everything together too long. And here's what hurts the most: for others they don't return. Not because they hate, not because they're cold, but because going back would mean betraying themselves all over again. Because they know if they go back, the cycle will repeat, and this time it might break them completely, so they choose silence, they choose peace, they choose distance, not out of cruelty, but out of love for themselves. And once they taste that peace, they cannot hand it back for chaos. If you've ever been left by an empath, know this: they didn't leave suddenly. They left quietly, long before their body walked away. They left when they realized their voice would never be heard. They left when the cost of staying became too high for their soul to pay. And if you are an empath hearing this now, know that leaving is not weakness. Walking away is not betrayal. Protecting your heart is not selfish. It is the greatest act of self-respect you will ever practice. You don't need to return to the fire that burned you. You don't need to explain why you chose peace. And you don't need permission to never go back, because when you finally walk away, you're not just leaving someone behind. You're finally choosing yourself, and that is the beginning of freedom. They call it sudden. They call it unexpected. But nothing about an empath leaving is ever sudden. It's the final breath after holding it in for far too long. It's the last straw on a mountain of silent weight. You see, empaths rarely explode. They rarely lash out. They don't make scenes or demand attention. They hold things in. They carry what others can't. They convince themselves they can absorb it all and still keep smiling. But there's always a breaking point. And it never looks loud. It looks like distance. It looks like quiet eyes that don't shine the same. It looks like a heart that's still giving, but giving in smaller and smaller pieces, because it's already been carved thin. The silent breaking point doesn't arrive in one moment. It builds. It builds through every apology they never received, through every time their kindness was taken for granted, through every "I'm fine" they whispered when they weren't, through every late night where they comforted others and went to bed empty themselves. At first, they tell themselves it's okay, that it's just temporary, that people don't mean to drain them, that love means patience, that understanding means endurance, so they stay, they pour, they forgive, they bend, but bending has a cost, and eventually bending turns into breaking, not the kind of breaking the world can see, the kind that happens quietly, deep inside the places no one checks. That's the truth most people miss. Empaths don't leave when they're angry. They don't leave in rage. They leave when there's nothing left in them to give, when even breathing in the same space feels heavy, when staying feels like choosing slow death. And because they've been quiet for so long, it always looks sudden. It looks like they just woke up one day and left. But in reality, they've been leaving in pieces for years. Every time they smiled while hurting, a piece of them walked out the door. Every time they begged for energy and got silence, a piece of them slipped away. By the time they actually leave, they're not leaving one person or one place. They're leaving the entire weight of being unseen, and here's the hardest part to understand. They won't announce it, they won't write a speech, they won't demand attention, because the breaking point is never about punishment. It's about self-preservation. It's about finally hearing their own heartbeat again. That's why it feels like shock to others, because no one noticed the cracks. No one saw the nights they cried quietly. No one paid attention when their laughter grew dim. The breaking point doesn't scream, it whispers. It whispers enough. And when that whisper becomes loud enough, the empath finally listens. They finally let go. Not because they stopped caring, not because they grew cold, but because they finally realized no one was caring for them. This is the silent breaking point. It's the moment an empath decides that their soul, their peace, their sanity cannot be sacrificed anymore. It's not anger, it's not revenge, it's survival, and here's the shift when they leave at this breaking point. They're not just walking away from someone, they're walking toward themselves, toward the life they were meant to live, toward the peace they've been starving for. The silent breaking point is the loudest choice they'll ever make, because it says, I matter too. My heart deserves rest too. My love deserves to be met too. So when you see an empath leave without warning, know this: the warning was always there. It just wasn't shouted. It was hidden in the quiet. It was carried in their silence. It was buried in their patience. Until one day, silence turned into absence, and absence became freedom. The breaking point never comes out of nowhere. It's built from the weight of unspoken pain, the kind that doesn't scream, the kind that hides behind tired smiles, the kind that piles up day after day until silence feels heavier than truth. Empaths know how to carry it. They're used to swallowing their own hurt. They're used to putting someone else's needs first. So they stay quiet. They keep absorbing. They convince themselves it's not worth making a scene. That peace is better than conflict. But what no one sees is how those small moments collect, how every ignored boundary lingers, how every dismissive word echoes long after it's spoken, how every time they give more than they receive, a weight is added to their heart. It starts light, one small disappointment, one broken promise, one thoughtless remark, something easy to forgive, something easy to brush aside, but the body remembers, the heart remembers, the soul keeps count even when the mind tries to forget, and soon the weight grows. It grows with every "you're too sensitive." It grows with every silence when they needed support. It grows with every time they showed up for someone who never showed up for them. It grows in ways that no one else can measure, because only they know how heavy it feels to carry what's unspoken. And here's the truth: the unspoken hurts more than what's said. The words left unsaid, the apologies never given, the acknowledgement that never came. Those are the sharpest wounds, because they never close. They stay open, raw, tender, waiting for care that never arrives. That's why leaving feels sudden, because the world only sees the moment they walk away. But they never see the years of small cuts leading up to it. They never see the nights of questioning themselves. They never see the way the empath rehearsed their needs in their mind, then swallowed the words because they feared being too much. The weight of unspoken pain is a silent prison. It makes the empath doubt their own worth. It makes them wonder if love should always feel this lonely. It makes them carry guilt for even wanting more. So they shrink themselves. They adjust their expectations. They give again, hoping maybe this time it'll be different, but it rarely is. And the truth is, an empath doesn't break from one betrayal. They break from the constant erosion of their spirit, from the slow wearing down of their boundaries, from the constant message that their needs are invisible, That message is the heaviest weight of all. Eventually they start to suffocate under it. They feel their own light dimming. They feel their energy leaking away. They feel their heart turning tired instead of open. And that's when survival instincts awaken, because staying becomes unbearable, because silence starts to crush them, because carrying everyone else's world while theirs crumbles is no longer possible. And that's why they leave, not to hurt, not to abandon, but to put the weight down, to breathe again, to step out of the prison of unspoken pain. If you've ever wondered why an empath disappears without a word, it's because words failed them long before they left. It's because they lived in silence until silence became unbearable. It's because carrying pain that no one else acknowledged was breaking them more than leaving ever could. And if you are the empath hearing this, let yourself put the weight down. You don't have to hold it all. You don't have to shrink to keep peace. You don't have to keep carrying wounds that no one else tends to. Your pain deserves to be spoken. Your needs deserve to be seen. And when you finally step out of silence, when you finally put the weight down, you're not weak. You're free. When empaths finally leave, the first question people ask is, why didn't they explain? Why didn't they say something? Why didn't they give a warning, a speech, a chance to fix it? But here's the truth empaths have already explained, not once, not twice, but 1,000 times in ways so small they went unnoticed. They explained in their quiet sighs, in their tired eyes, in the way they pulled back just a little, hoping someone would ask why, in the way they stayed up comforting others, while silently wishing for someone to comfort them. Every shift in their energy was a message. Every silence was a plea. Every hidden tear was a confession. But most people don't listen to whispers. They only hear screams, and empaths rarely scream. They rarely fight. They rarely demand, because their nature is to protect harmony, even when that harmony costs them their own peace. So by the time they walk away, they've already said everything they had to say. Just not in the way people expected. Not in anger. Not in long speeches, not in ultimatums. They spoke in patience. They spoke in endurance. They spoke in silence, but silence, too, is a language. And when you live in silence long enough, you learn something painful. You learn that some people only notice your absence, never your struggle. You learn that your soft words can be invisible. You learn that no matter how many times you quietly explain, if someone doesn't want to hear you, they won't. That's why empaths don't explain when they leave. Because they've explained already. Because explaining feels like begging now. Because repeating their pain feels like reopening a wound for someone who will never bandage it. And deep down, empaths know this. If someone truly cared, they would have noticed sooner. They would have listened without the final warning. They would have paid attention to the small signs, the soft signals, the tired smiles. So when leaving finally happens, there are no words left. The well has run dry. People call it cold. They call it heartless. But it isn't. It's exhaustion. It's the final stage of carrying unspoken pain. It's realizing that no explanation will ever be enough for ears that refuse to hear the first 100. So they choose silence again, but this time not as endurance. This time, silence is self-respect. It's the boundary they couldn't speak into existence before. It's the only language left when words have lost their power. And there's something freeing in that silence, something empowering, because for once, they are no longer explaining themselves. They are no longer trying to justify their needs. They are no longer shrinking their voice to fit someone else's comfort. They simply walk away, and in that walk, they reclaim their worth. If you've ever wondered why an empath left without explanation, understand that explanation was never missing. It was just unheard. It was there in the small moments you dismissed. It was there in the nights they stayed awake alone. It was there in the pieces of themselves they gave while waiting for you to give back. And if you are the empath, hear this: you don't owe anyone your voice once it's been ignored. You don't owe endless explanations to people who never wanted to listen. You don't owe a final speech to validate your choice to leave. Sometimes silence is the clearest truth. Sometimes leaving without words is the loudest message of all. Because your worth was never meant to be debated, your needs were never meant to be defended like a crime, and your heart was never meant to beg to be seen. So if they call you cold for leaving without explaining, let them. Because you know the truth, you know how many times you already explained, you know how many chances you quietly gave, and you know that silence, in the end, was not the absence of explanation. It was the presence of self-respect. Once an empath leaves, people often wait for their return. They assume the door is still open. They assume the heart that once gave endlessly will come back again. But empaths rarely return, and when they don't, it isn't out of cruelty. It's out of survival, because going back means stepping into the same cycle. It means reopening the same wounds. It means handing over their heart to the same silence that broke it. And once they've tasted peace, they can't trade it again for chaos. You have to understand empaths don't leave easily. They don't walk away at the first disappointment. They don't vanish because of small mistakes. They leave after carrying more than most people will ever understand. They leave after giving chance after chance, after explaining in ways no one heard, after holding on long past the point of reason. So when they finally go, it's because they've reached the end of themselves. And once that end is reached, there is no going back, because they know if they return, they will lose themselves again. And that's the line they refuse to cross twice, because leaving wasn't just walking away from someone else. It was walking back to themselves. It was finally choosing their own peace over someone else's comfort. It was the moment they decided their soul deserved more than constant depletion. That choice changes them. It awakens something inside. It shows them that life doesn't have to feel like carrying everyone else's pain alone. It teaches them the beauty of boundaries, the power of saying no, the relief of choosing distance when closeness hurts. And once they learn that once they feel the freedom of living without constant heaviness, they can never go back to who they were before. They can't unlearn the truth that their love deserves reciprocity. They can't forget the lesson that their silence matters too. They can't pretend that being invisible is acceptable anymore. So no, they don't return, not because they stopped caring, not because they lost their compassion, but because they finally understand that returning would cost them their soul. And this time they are unwilling to pay that price. If you've ever been left by an empath, don't mistake their absence as hatred. It isn't revenge, it isn't punishment, it's protection. They are protecting the last pieces of themselves that were nearly lost. They are guarding the light that almost went out. And if you are the empath hearing this now, you need to remember not going back does not make you heartless. Not returning does not make you cruel. It makes you wise. It makes you whole. It makes you someone who finally learned that love should not come at the cost of yourself. Because the truth is, your absence is not rejection. It is a declaration. It says, I will not live unseen anymore. It says, I will not keep pouring from a dry cup. It says, I will choose my own peace even if it means walking away from yours. And that is the kind of strength no one can take from you. That is the kind of power that changes your life forever. Because once you know your worth, you will never again settle for a place that made you forget it. So when an empath leaves and doesn't return, understand this: it isn't a door closed in anger. It's a door closed in healing. It's a door closed to protect the heart that was open for too long. And once that door is shut, it stays shut. Not out of bitterness, but out of love. Love for the self they almost lost.